Hello and welcome to this first lecture in this series on medical law. In this first lecture is very much an introduction, introducing you to this series and what I intend to cover in this series. Firstly though, a bit about me. I am Charlie and I'm a law LLB student at the University of Leicester. So shall we go on to get an idea of what I intend to cover in this introduction lecture. So by the end of this lecture, you should be able to outline the topics which we're going to be covering in this series, as well as describe the main skills which should be developed within this topic, and I will help to develop those skills throughout these lectures. But firstly, just a bit of general information. This lecture series, is to be used for consolidation and revision purposes only. This does not replace any actual lectures or tutorials or any other teaching you might have at university if you are, like me, a law student. This does not replace any of that. This is essentially just extra additional materials to help you revise and consolidate the information and maybe listen to the information in a different way. For instance, I find that listening to podcasts or watching videos can be a great way to get the law into my head whilst I'm doing something else like walking or running. And so I'll get back to this again when we get to active revision. But yeah, you should use it for those purposes, not as a sole thing to rely on. On that note, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the comments section below and I will try my best to answer them. And check individual course details, because courses between different universities in particular can change rather dramatically, and so the stuff I might cover in this series you might not cover, or you might cover additional things which I'm not going to be covering. So do just check your specification to make sure that you're watching the right stuff. And active revision, do not use this lecture series as your only source of revision, because although that might help you in some way, if you want to be a high performing student, using these lectures alone will not work, because that will be a very much a passive revision method and you really need to use some active revision to test yourself, do exam style questions, mock exams, etc. And on that topic, there's lots of different possible assessment types. So multiple choice questions, single best answer questions are particularly popular for the professional law courses. So whether you want to be a barrister or a solicitor, you will most likely come across single best answer questions when you're doing that training. Essays, where we argue what the law ought to be, whether the law is right or not. Problem questions, where we're applying the law as it is, as well as case comments and presentations. There's various different methods and I cannot cover them all, so do make sure you are getting practice in the areas which are relevant to you in your course. I do intend to create some tutorial / seminar style questions though. Most likely that will be multiple choice essays / problem questions, and then I may even create some videos, i.e. like a video tutorial, where we can go through those questions. So if that's the sort of thing you would like, please do let me know in the comments section below and I'll be able to provide that. So next we're just going to look at some of the key skills which we should develop in this lecture series. So critical analysis is a big one, comparing, contrasting different laws, evaluating the law for strengths and limitations, and just how far does the law do its job and how could the law be better. There'll be problem spotting and solving, so we will need to look for problems and how the law will come in, and that will very much require the application of the law. So if you are an individual who's looking to practice law professionally, those problem spotting, solving and application of law is all very important, as are the next three skills. Hopefully you should be developing communication skills, both oral communication skills as well as written communication skills. That will also help you in your exams, because if you can communicate clearly, the examiners are going to like you, as well as teamwork, because you might be doing assessments with your peers, for instance. We might do study groups. And then a big part of law degrees is the independent nature, so you should develop a sense of independence during your medical law module. But anyway, shall we go straight into the topics which I intend to cover in this medical law lecture series? So I will very much start this medical law series looking at medical negligence. And if you're doing a qualifying law degree, you will be doing the 7 foundations of legal knowledge, which everyone has to do if they want to become a solicitor or a barrister. And one of those foundations of legal knowledge is the law of tort, civil wrongs. And so medical negligence very much builds upon the law of tort. When you did the tort of negligence, you may have even touched on medical negligence. And so we'll be looking at the duty and standard of care expected of a doctor, and when will there be a breach of that duty, and what will happen when there is a breach of duty. And we will be looking at the case law in detail about medical negligence, and particularly the cases of Bolam and Bolifo, which are 2 of the main top key cases for when it comes to medical negligence or any professional negligence. Then this is pretty much the only topic which we would have probably seen prior to studying medical law from a legal perspective. And after this, we then go on to something which we may have looked at before, but we're now looking at from a medical point of view. And that's going on to informed consent, where we will be looking at through a legal lens what actually is informed consent, when can we consent, and importantly, when can we not consent? There's so many different rules around who can consent and who cannot, and so we'll be looking in detail at that and what happens when there's disagreements. And that will be very much a focus on adult consent. But we will then go on to older children and teenagers and look at consent for them. So obviously from the age of 16, children can consent to medical treatment, but then you might have come across Gillick competence previously, but we will be looking at Gillick competence, which says that children who are younger might be able to consent if they meet the threshold met in the case of Gillick. So we will then examine the Gillick case there, which brought about this principle of Gillick competence. After we've looked at consent for older children and teenagers, the next topic very much builds upon the last 2 topics in terms of consent, and that's the Mental Capacity Act. And a big part of this area will be the interactions it has with consent. So whether someone has mental capacity to consent or not is a very big part of the consent topic as a whole. So we will be looking at that, as well as mental capacity more widely as well, which is a very interesting area of medical law. And after this, we will go back to consent for a bit, but in this case, it will be consent for babies and young children who will not be able to consent themselves. And so this is where parents will often be expected to provide consent, but there's obviously many cases where the parents don't consent to what the doctors are proposing to do. More often than not in the case law, it is the doctor deciding to turn off life support or not try another treatment. And so we will look at what happens when the parents and doctors disagree and the approach that the courts take in these situations. We then go on to some topics which are very much debatable type topics, both in wider society as well as medical law. And we look at, firstly, assisted reproduction, which has really grown in the last 10-20 years or so, where we will be looking at IVF, the ethical and societal debates around assisted reproduction, and issues of consent. So the law in England and Wales prescribes very clear legal instructions on when assisted reproduction can occur and when it cannot. And so we will look at the different exceptions and the law generally around that, which is another very interesting area. I'm probably saying that about everything, but that just goes to show just how interesting medical law actually is. And then after that, we will be going on to the next topic, which is abortion, which is pretty much self-explanatory. So we will look at the law around that. And then we will go on to the final two topics. So the first one, it will be the end of life, looking at euthanasia / assisted dying or suicide. I include all those names because different people like to call it different things. For me, I'm very much for euthanasia, but others might want to call it assisted suicide or assisted dying. In the jurisprudence we have in England and Wales, it's very much assisted suicide. So we'll be looking at the case law around that, as well as maybe an examination of the assisted dying bill, which is currently going through Parliament. And who knows, by the time I deliver this lecture, maybe that will actually be a law. So that would be very interesting to look at. Then once we've looked at this topic, we'll then go to the second part of the end of life area, looking at ending life support. So when there's someone who's living on life support, when can we turn the life support off, and what's the law around that? So that's, in a nutshell, is what we intend to cover in this series on medical law. And so you should now be able to outline the topics which I intend to cover in this series and describe the main skills to be developed in this topic. And so just to conclude, if you like this video, please do like. By liking, I can see there's a clear demand for these videos, so that will encourage me to continue to produce these videos. Please do comment, whether that's any questions or feedback, please do put them in. It's always great to engage with you all. I will try and respond to as many of the comments as I can, and it shows me again that you're interacting with this material and it's material you want. And also subscribe, that again shows me that you want this material, and it also means you will be notified when I upload more of this kind of material. And please do support me. There will be links in either the comments or description boxes below where I'm asking for financial support, and there's two aims for that. I will go into why I'm asking for support in more detail in future videos, but essentially one part of it is so I can develop my education, so I can then provide public legal education like this, because I believe educating the public around the law is extremely important. As well as, when I qualify as a barrister, it will support and allow me to do pro bono projects, offer legal advice and legal representation for free pro bono for those who would not otherwise be able to afford a barrister. So please, please, please do consider supporting me in that way. But thank you very much for listening to this introductory lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Goodbye.